Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. The road led through endless forests where pines and cedars stood like silent sentinels, protecting this small corner of British Columbia. Emily and Liam's car, an old SUV with a shabby gray body, hummed under the weight of boxes and suitcases that they somehow packed into the trunk and back seat. The interior smelled of coffee from a thermos and slightly dusty, the smell of things that had been waiting too long in a city apartment. Rare signs flashed outside the window, and finally the first houses appeared ahead, wooden, with sloping roofs, nestled among the hills. "Well, it looks like we've arrived," Liam said, glancing at Emily. His voice was soft, but there was weariness in it. He ran his hand through his dark hair, ruffling it slightly, and turned off the engine. The car fell silent, and there was silence, broken only by the rustling of the wind in the branches. Emily smiled as she looked at their new home through the windshield. It was a small cottage with peeling blue paint on the walls and a wide porch. The windows were old, with wooden frames, but they already reflected the pale sun breaking through the clouds. She stretching her stiff neck after long hours behind the wheel, and said, "I can't believe we did this." "Fresh start, Liam. Just you and me." He nodded, looking at her with a slight smile. His brown eyes sparkled, but a shadow flickered in them, either from fatigue or from something else. They had been together for 6 years, and during this time their relationship had gone through a lot. Their first tiny apartment in Vancouver, quarrels over little things, laughing at stupid movies in the evenings. Moving to this town was their common decision to escape from the noise of the big city, from the endless bustle, which seemed to be slowly corroding their connection. "Let's unload before it gets dark," Liam suggested, opening the car door. "Otherwise, I don't want to carry boxes of your books in the dark." Emily laughed, her laughter echoing down the empty street. "My books are a treasure, not a burden. And in general, you yourself signed up for this when you suggested moving." "Oh, I remember how you talked me into it," he teased, pulling the first suitcase out of the trunk. Liam, imagine, fresh air, silence, no neighbors knocking on the wall if we watch TV shows loudly. "I bought it." "And he did the right thing," she answered, picking up the box labeled kitchen and heading towards the porch. "It will be good here, I feel." The inside of the house turned out to be more spacious than it looked from the outside. Living room with distressed wood floors and fireplace, kitchen with faded green cabinets, 2 bedrooms upstairs. The furniture so far was only what the previous owners had left: an old sofa with faded upholstery, a rickety table, and a couple of chairs. The rest their own had yet to be unpacked. Emily placed the box on the kitchen table and looked around. Her blonde hair, tied up in a messy bun, came loose from the elastic, and she impatiently tucked a strand behind her ear. "Liam, have you seen where my kettle is?" she shouted, rummaging through the box. "The one you call my little morning hero," came his voice from the living room. "I think it's in the blue bag by the door." She found her bag, took out the kettle, and put it on the stove. Liam walked into the kitchen carrying another box and leaned against the frame, watching her. "You're already settling in, right?" he asked, crossing his arms. "The kettle is in place, that means order." "How could it be otherwise?" she answered, turning on the gas. "Tea is the basis of civilization. I won't survive this move without him." He came closer and hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Emily froze for a second, feeling the warmth of his hands, and closed her eyes. It was one of those moments she loved, simple, quiet, when she didn't have to say anything. But lately there have been fewer such moments. Moving, packing, endless to-do lists, all this has left its mark. They were still close, but somewhere between boxes and goodbyes to friends in Vancouver, a slight weariness had crept into their relationship, like dust settling on shelves. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, pulling away and looking into her eyes. "Yes, I'm just tired," she answered, smiling. "And you?" "Same, but I'm glad we're here. This is right." She nodded, and they silently began to unpack the boxes. Outside the window, the sun was setting towards the horizon, painting the sky in soft orange tones. The next day, Emily went to the local school. She had been hired as a junior high literature teacher and was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The school was a 10-minute walk from the house, a one-story building with a red roof and a small courtyard where children were already running around despite the early hour. The director, Mrs. Hart, turned out to be a woman of about 50 with a good-natured smile and slightly disheveled gray hair. "Welcome, Emily," she said, extending her hand. "We are glad that you are with us. We don't have many new people here, so you'll immediately attract attention." "Thank you," Emily replied, shaking her hand. "I'm glad to be here, too. I've long wanted to work in a place like this, small, cozy." "Oh, we have plenty of comfort," Mrs. Hart laughed. "Come on, I'll show you your class." The classroom turned out to be bright, with large windows overlooking the forest. The desks were old, but clean, and on the blackboard someone had left a chalk drawing of a smiling sun. Emily smiled as she looked at him. "It was probably the kids doing their best," said Mrs. Hart. "They are creative, sometimes too much." "I like it," Emily replied, placing her bag on the teacher's desk. "I myself love it when students are not afraid to express themselves." They talked a little more about schedules and curriculum, and soon Mrs. Hart left, leaving Emily alone with the class. She walked along the desks, ran her finger along the windowsill, and inhaled the smell of chalk and wood. She liked this school. There was something real here that she missed in the noisy city classrooms. When she got home, Liam was already tinkering in the living room, trying to assemble the bookcase. The instructions were lying on the floor, and he was sitting in the middle of the scattered boards, holding a screwdriver. "How is my master doing?" Emily asked, taking off her coat. "If this closet doesn't fall on my head, consider me a genius," he grumbled, but there was a joke in his voice. "How was your day?" "Fine. The school is nice, and the kids seem to be too. Tomorrow is my first lesson, so I'm a little worried." Liam put the screwdriver down and stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You can handle it. You always manage." "Thank you," she said, approaching him. "How are you? What did you do besides fight with furniture?" "I went to the store for groceries. There is a shop nearby. The owner is an old man with a beard like a lumberjack. He said that we are now urban, but he will accept us if I buy local beer from him." Emily laughed. "Well, then we're officially in business. We need to celebrate." They decided to have a simple dinner pasta with sauce from a jar and a bottle of the same local beer. They sat down at the rickety kitchen table, and Emily picked up the bottle. "For a new house," she said. "For us," Liam added, clinking glasses with her. The beer was cold, and the pasta was slightly overcooked, but it was comforting. They chatted about little things, how Emily planned to decorate the classroom, how Liam wanted to get a job at a local craft shop. He was a mechanic, and although there were no large auto repair shops in the town, he hoped that his skills would be useful. "Maybe we can go for a walk tomorrow," Emily suggested, finishing the last spoonful. "Let's see what there is here, besides the forest and the school." "Good idea," Liam nodded. "Just don't make me climb the mountain. I haven't gotten over carrying boxes yet." "Agreed," she smiled. "No mountains, just a walk." The following days passed in a calm rhythm. Emily was getting used to school, to children who turned out to be noisy but inquisitive. Her lessons began with her reading short stories to them, and then they would come up with their own stories together. The children quickly became attached to her, and this warmed her soul. Liam, meanwhile, was organizing the house, fixing creaking floorboards, taking apart boxes, even starting to dig through the old shed behind the house, where he found rusty tools and a couple of fishing rods. But the more they settled down, the more noticeable the very routine that lurked in their relationship became. In the morning, Emily went to school, Liam stayed at home or ran errands, and in the evening they had dinner together, but the conversations became shorter. They didn't quarrel, didn't argue, they just seemed to move away slightly, each busy with their own things. One evening, Emily was sitting on the sofa with a book, and Liam was watching TV, an old box that they found in the bedroom and connected to the antenna. There was some kind of documentary about bears on the screen, but Liam didn't seem to be paying much attention. "Aren't you tired of the silence?" she suddenly asked, closing the book. He turned to her, frowning slightly. "In terms of, well, it's so quiet here. After Vancouver, it's strange. No cars, no people, just us." "I like it," he said, shrugging. "Don't you?" "Like, I just, I don't know. Sometimes it seems that we are too close. Maybe we should invite someone to visit, or meet someone yourself." Liam thought, rubbing his chin. "Maybe it's worth it." In the shop, the old man mentioned some Tom who repairs tractors. He says he's a local legend. I could meet him, see if there is a job. "I could call someone from school," Emily suggested. "Mrs. Hart, for example. She's cute." "Agreed," Liam nodded. "Let's be social." They smiled at each other, but something unspoken hung in the air. Emily returned to her book, Liam to the TV. The bears on the screen growled, and outside the window the wind rustled, shaking the tops of the pine trees. A week has passed. Emily became more and more immersed in work, and Liam began to leave the house more often, either to the store or to the barn, or just to sit on the porch with a mug of coffee. Their relationship remained warm, but this easy routine followed them like a shadow. They still laughed together, cuddled before bed, planned outings, but somewhere deep down, each felt that moving did not solve all their problems. He gave them a fresh start, but did not erase the old habits. One morning, as Emily was getting ready for school, Liam walked into the kitchen with a mug in his hands. "Will you be back late today?" he asked, watching her stuff the notebooks into her bag. "No, as usual." "What are you planning?" "I'll go to Tom's workshop. He called yesterday and said that he had a couple of cars that needed to be looked at." "Great," she said, pulling on her coat. "Maybe we can go somewhere in the evening. In a cafe, for example. I saw one on the main street." "Great idea," he smiled. "Then see you in the evening." "See you tonight," she answered, kissing him on the cheek. She left the house, breathed in the cold morning air, and headed towards the school. Liam stayed in the kitchen, finishing his coffee and looking out the window. Behind the glass lay the forest, silent and endless, and the house was quiet, too quiet. And in this silence, their new life slowly took shape, but so far none of them knew where it would lead them. The morning at school began with the usual hubbub of children's voices coming from the corridor. Emily stood at the blackboard in her classroom, erasing yesterday's chalk drawings. One of the students had drawn a cat with a huge mustache, and the signature, Mr. Meow. She smiled, shaking the chalk from her hands, and began laying out her notebooks on the teacher's desk. Her first weeks at school went smoothly. The children loved her, lessons went according to plan, and even Mrs. Hart praised her a couple of times for her fresh approach. But today there was something new in the air, maybe because of the crisp autumn wind outside, or because she was finally starting to feel like she belonged here. The bell rang for recess, and Emily gathered her things and headed to the staff room. It was a small room with a worn sofa, an old coffee table, and cabinets along the walls. There was an electric kettle on the windowsill, and next to it a can of instant coffee and a couple of mugs with broken handles. There were already several colleagues in the staff room. Mrs. Hart was leafing through a magazine in the corner, and the elderly math teacher, Miss Green, was grumbling to herself as she sorted through a stack of notebooks. Emily placed her bag on a chair and walked over to the kettle to pour herself some water when the door swung open and a man walked into the room. Tall, with dark hair slightly touched with gray at the temples, he was dressed in a dark green sweater and jeans. In his hands he carried a leather folder and a mug with the inscription, "Best Historian," clearly a gift from someone with a sense of humor. His appearance seemed to shake up the sleepy atmosphere of the staff room. "Good morning, ladies," he said with a slight smile, placing the mug on the table. His voice was deep, with a slight hoarseness, and there was a sense of confidence in it. "I hope I'm not late for coffee." Mrs. Hart looked up from the magazine and grinned. "Matt, you're always late for coffee, but never late for gossip. Emily, meet Matt Crawford, our history teacher. Matt, this is Emily, a new girl." Emily turned to him, holding out her hand. "Nice to meet you," she said, smiling. "I heard that we have a historian here, but I thought you would be, well, older." Matt laughed, shaking her hand. His hand was warm and strong, and sparks of amusement flashed in his gray eyes. "Older? Is this a compliment or a hint that I look too young for my gray hair? By the way, I'm 42, by the way. And you, apparently, are literature." "Yes, junior high," she nodded, removing her hand. "I'm just starting to get used to it here." "Well, welcome to our little world," he said, opening a folder and taking out some papers. "If anything, please contact me. I've been here for 10 years now. I know all the local secrets. For example, where is good coffee hidden?" She teased, pointing to the instant jar. "Oh, this is the main secret," he played along, lowering his voice to a whisper. "They say Mrs. Hart hides it in her office, but no one dared to check." Mrs. Hart snorted from her corner, not looking up from her magazine. "Matt, don't start your stories. Emily, don't listen to him. He's a master at making up stories." "That's because I'm a historian," he retorted, winking at Emily. "Everything I say is based on facts." "Well, almost." Emily smiled wider, feeling how the lightness of this conversation relieved morning fatigue. She poured herself some water and sat down at the table across from Matt as he laid out his papers, some class notes covered in neat handwriting. "So you've really been here for 10 years?" she asked, taking a sip. "Isn't it boring in such a small town?" "Boring?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "With these children?" "Yes, they arrange mini revolutions for me every day. Yesterday a guy said that Columbus was a pirate, not a discoverer. I had to prove the opposite for half a lesson." "Oh, I have my rebels too," Emily laughed. "Last week, a girl wrote a story about a dog who became the mayor of the city, with a detailed plan for her election campaign." "Brilliant," Matt said, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe she should teach instead of us." They continued to chat, jumping from topic to topic, from school curiosities to Emily getting used to life in the town. Matt turned out to be an easy conversationalist. He knew how to listen, but at the same time he filled the pauses with witty remarks. There was something attractive about him, not only his appearance, although Emily involuntarily noted his broad shoulders and warm smile, but also his demeanor. He was a good 10 years older than her, but he acted as if age was just a number that did not constrain his energy. The break ended, and they went to their classes, but this short conversation left Emily with a slight feeling of uplift. She didn't think too much of him, just another colleague, nice and friendly. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the thought flashed that such meetings could make her days at school a little brighter. At home, Liam was tinkering in the shed, taking apart some old fishing rods he found last week. He had already made arrangements with Tom, a local mechanic, to look at a couple of cars in the shop, which gave him hope for a job. He liked to be busy, to keep his hands busy. It was a distraction from the silence that sometimes seemed too loud in their new home. When Emily returned, he was just leaving the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. She walked into the kitchen, throwing her bag on a chair, and Liam noticed that she was smiling a little wider than usual. "Is it a good day?" he asked, opening the refrigerator to take out a bottle of water. "Yes, not bad," she answered, taking off her coat. "The kids were great today. One boy wrote a poem about the forest, can you imagine? So touching." "Well done," Liam said, taking a sip. "How are you? Aren't you tired?" "A little. But in the staff room, I met a colleague, Matt. He teaches history. Funny guy." "Funny?" Liam asked, glancing at her. "How is that?" "Well, he's witty," Emily shrugged, pouring herself some tea. "He talked about his students. He has a whole collection of their stories." Liam nodded without going into detail. He was pleased that Emily liked her job and that she was settling in. He himself tried to find his place here, but so far his days were filled more with everyday affairs than with communication. He didn't attach much importance to her words, just another day, another colleague. But something in her tone, in that slight sparkle in her eyes, remained with him, like a faint echo. "How are you doing?" she asked, sitting down at the table with a mug. Fine. I visited Tom and looked at one car. It's an old wreck, but I'll revive it if he gives the go-ahead. I'll go again tomorrow. Great, she smiled. Maybe soon we will have two working people in the house. I hope so, he said, sitting down opposite. Otherwise, I'm already starting to feel like a housewife. She laughed, and they continued chatting about little things, about buying a new rug for the hallway, about how Liam wanted to fix the porch. Dinner was simple, fries and salad, but they were cozy. Liam looked at Emily, listened to her stories about school, and thought that maybe this move really was the right move. She looked pleased, and it warmed him. But somewhere deep down he noticed that her voice sounded a little livelier than usual, and that was new. The next day at school, Emily ran into Matt again. It happened by chance. She went into the teacher's room to get printer paper, and he was standing at the window, looking at the yard where the children were playing ball. Hiding from your students again, she teased, opening her locker. He turned around, smiling. Hiding? No, I'm just enjoying the view. These little ones are real hurricanes. How are you, Emily? It's the second day of the week, and are you already tired? Not yet, she answered, taking out a sheaf of paper, although my students decided today that I should read them a whole book in one lesson. I barely persuaded them to stop at the chapter. You have talent, he said, coming closer. If I were you, I'd give up after the first page. Oh, I don't believe it, she laughed. You are a historian. You probably have iron endurance. Exposure, yes, but not patience, he winked. By the way, how do you like our town? Already got the hang of it. Almost, she nodded. My husband and I are still settling in the house. We're still sorting out the boxes. Husband? Matt asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. So you two are here? Yes, Liam is my husband. He is a mechanic and is currently looking for work. What about you? Are you local or also a visitor? Local, he answered, crossing his arms. I was born here, went to study, then returned. This town is addictive, you know. There's something real about him. I agree, she said, although I'm still getting used to the silence. It was noisy in Vancouver, but here there was only forest and wind. Silence is our main trump card, he smiled. But if you get bored, call me. I know a couple of places where you can unwind. Emily hesitated slightly, but immediately smiled back. Thank you, I'll keep it in mind. The conversation was interrupted when Miss Green came into the staff room, muttering something about a broken printer. Matt winked at Emily and returned to his papers as she walked out into the hallway, feeling a slight warmth on her cheeks. It was just flirting, nothing serious, friendly chat with a colleague. But there was something in his words, in that light tone, that made her heart beat a little faster. At home, Liam met her with dinner. He decided to cook chicken with vegetables, and the kitchen smelled of spices. Emily walked in, dropping her bag by the door, and inhaled the scent. Wow, are you the chef today? She said, approaching the stove. I'm trying, he answered, stirring the pan. How is the day? Fine. The children again came up with something incredible, and it was fun in the teacher's room. Matt told how one student tried to prove that dinosaurs lived in the last century. Liam chuckled, not looking up from his cooking. This Matt guy seems to be the life of the party. Yes, he's funny, she said casually, taking out the plates. Knows how to cheer you up. Liam nodded, but this time he said nothing. He wasn't jealous, and he didn't see any reason Emily was always open, talking about her day without hiding. But something in her voice, in that light liveliness, pricked him again. He dismissed the thought, chalking it all up to fatigue, and put the frying pan on the table. Eat while it's hot, he said, sitting down opposite. They ate, chatting about small things, and the evening passed peacefully. But Liam, without realizing it, began to notice that Emily was returning home a little different, not tired as before, but with some new sparkle in her eyes. He did not suspect anything serious, did not build theories. I just felt that something was changing and didn't know what to do about it yet. Another week has passed. Emily and Matt began to cross paths more often in the staff room, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose, when one of them brought coffee or suggested discussing school matters. The conversations remained light, but more and more often notes of flirtation slipped into them. Matt would casually compliment her dress, and she would respond by teasing him for his old-fashioned jokes. It was innocent, but at the same time dangerously close to a line that Emily had no intention of crossing just yet. One day, when they were alone in the staff room, Matt took a thermos from his bag and poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Try it," he said, handing her one. "This is not the same stuff from the can. Real from home." Emily took the mug, inhaled the aroma, and took a sip. "Wow, this is really delicious," she said, looking at him with a smile. "Where do you get one of these?" "Company secret," he winked. "But I can tell you, I have a coffee machine at home. Come sometime, I'll show you." She laughed and waved him off. "Sounds like a scam." "What if it's true?" he answered, looking into her eyes a little longer than necessary. Emily felt a warmth spreading through her chest and quickly looked away, pretending to check something in her bag. This was the moment when she could have walked away, changed the subject, but instead she stayed, continuing to chat with him until the end of the break. When she got home, Liam was in the living room, leafing through some car magazine. He raised his head when he noticed her. "You're late today," he said, putting the magazine aside. "Yes, I stayed in the staff room," she answered, taking off her coat. "We discussed with colleagues a new project for children." "With Matt?" he asked, almost casually. "And with him too," she nodded, without going into details. "He suggested doing something about the history of the town. Interesting idea." Liam nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer. She looked animated, almost radiant, and it wasn't just out of fatigue or joy for the students. He didn't say anything, just returned to the magazine, but for the first time a shadow of doubt flashed through his mind. Not suspicion, not anxiety, just a question that he had not yet decided to ask either her or himself. Autumn was in full force in the town. The leaves on the trees outside Emily and Liam's window were turning crimson and gold, and the morning air had become sharp, tasting of pine needles and damp earth. Emily was already used to the short walk to school, 10 minutes along a narrow path, past old fences and rare houses, where local residents sometimes greeted her with a nod or a lazy wave of the hand. Her days at school became a familiar rhythm. Lessons, children laughing, short breaks in the teacher's lounge. But with the advent of Matt, this rhythm began to acquire new shades, subtle, barely perceptible, but increasingly noticeable. That day, she walked into the staff room with a stack of graded notebooks under her arm. It had been a chaotic morning. One of her students spilled juice on her desk, another lost her textbook, and she had to improvise half the lesson. She threw the notebooks on the table and reached for the teapot when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You look like you fought an entire army," Matt said as he entered the room. He was wearing a dark shirt with rolled-up sleeves and holding the same leather folder in his hands. His smile, as always, was slightly mocking, but warm. Emily turned around, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Almost got it right. My 7-year-olds decided to cause chaos today. How are you?" "I have teenagers," he shrugged, putting the folder on the table. "They are not chaos, but a sleeping volcano." One guy asked if it was true that Napoleon was a vampire because he was pale and loved the night. I had to explain that this is not so. She laughed, and this sound, light and sincere, filled the small room. Matt leaned against the cabinet, arms crossed, and looked at her with interest. "You have a talent for laughing at all this," he said. "I would have given up a long time ago." "It's not talent, it's survival," she answered, pouring water into a mug. "If I don't laugh, they'll eat me." "Well, then you are a champion of survival," he winked. "By the way, how is your project about the town going? I found a couple of old maps in the library yesterday. I can bring it if you want." Emily nodded, feeling her spirits lift. Conversations with Matt were always like this, light, but with some depth that she couldn't quite explain. "That would be great," she said. "I was just thinking about how to make the lessons more interesting. Maybe we can arrange something like an excursion for the children." "Great idea," he perked up. There is one place nearby an old sawmill. Nothing works there anymore, but stories about it still circulate. They say there are even ghosts there. Ghosts? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you sure these are not your historical tales? I swear, he raised his hands in a joking gesture. Locals swear they saw shadows. I don't believe it myself, but the kids will like it. They continued chatting until the bell interrupted them. Emily left for class with a slight feeling of warmth that stayed with her all day. Matt was just a colleague, she reminded herself, but his presence brought something new into her routine like a breath of fresh air in a stagnant room. At home, Liam spent the morning in Tom's workshop. It was a squat barn on the edge of town, littered with rusty parts and old tires. Tom, a stocky man with a thick beard and hands black with oil, turned out to be a good conversationalist. They quickly hit it off, discussing engines and local gossip. Liam loved working on cars, it was what he did best, and he felt at home in the workshop. When he returned home, the sun was already setting. Emily sat in the kitchen, leafing through notebooks and drinking tea. Her hair was down and she looked relaxed, but there was that same sparkle in her eyes that Liam was starting to notice more and more. Hello, he said, taking off his jacket. How does the day go? Hello, she smiled, putting down her pen. Fine. The children were surprisingly obedient today. And you? Nothing either, he answered, sitting down opposite. Fixed an old Toyota for Tom. He said I could come whenever I wanted. The pay is a little, but there is work. This is great, she said, genuinely happy. So you are now officially a local mechanic. Looks like it, he chuckled. What are you doing? Still fighting with your students? Not anymore, she answered, sipping her tea. Today we even discussed the project with Matt. He suggested organizing a tour of the old sawmill. He says it's interesting there. Liam nodded, but his gaze lingered on her. The name Matt began to appear too often in her stories, and although he did not want to attach importance to it, something in her tone, a slight animation, almost imperceptible, grabbed him. This Matt guy seems to know everything about the town, he said, trying to sound casual. Yes, he's lived here for a long time, Emily shrugged. And he's really an interesting conversationalist. He has a lot of ideas. It looks like you're having fun with him, Liam remarked, opening a bottle of water. Emily looked at him, frowning slightly. Well, yes, he's funny. And what? Nothing, he replied, taking a sip. I'm just glad you like your job. She smiled, but a shadow flashed in her gaze as if she had caught something in his voice, but did not elaborate. They continued eating dinner, discussing plans for the weekend, but for the first time Liam felt like there was something unspoken hanging between them. Not a quarrel, not tension, just a thin crack that he could not name yet. The next day at school, Emily and Matt found themselves in the staff room together again. It happened after lunch. She came in to get some chalk, and he was sitting at the table, leafing through some old magazine with yellowed pages. Did you find something interesting? She asked, nodding at the magazine. Yes, notes about that sawmill, he answered, looking up. They write here that it closed about 50 years ago after a fire. No one died, but no one has worked there since. It's creepy, she said, sitting down opposite him. Do you think children should be told this? Of course, he smiled. Let's add a little drama. They will be delighted. Emily shook her head, but her lips twitched into a smile. You know exactly how to turn them on. This is my talent, he winked, and you have a talent for calming them down. We would be a great team. She laughed, feeling how his words light, but with a hint settled somewhere inside. It was another moment of flirtation, and again she didn't stop him. Not because I wanted something more, but because it was pleasant like a game in which there are no stakes. Maybe it's true, she said, standing up. Okay, I'll go get ready for class. Thanks for the sawmill idea. You're welcome, he replied, following her with his eyes. When she left, Matt remained seated, thoughtfully tapping his fingers on the table. He didn't make plans, didn't plan anything serious, he just enjoyed her company. But deep down, he knew that this lightness between them could lead to something more if they both didn't stop. At home, Liam spent the day in the workshop, and in the evening he decided to surprise Emily. He made her favorite apple pie. He was no master at baking, but he tried, and the kitchen was filled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon. When Emily returned, she inhaled the scent and smiled. "What is this, a pie?" she asked, looking into the kitchen. "Yeah," he answered, wiping his hands on a towel. "I thought you'd be happy after work." "You are a miracle," she said, hugging him. "Thank you." They sat down at the table, and the pie turned out to be unexpectedly tasty, although slightly crooked. Emily talked about the day, how the children drew pictures of the sawmill after her story, and Liam listened, nodding. But when she mentioned Matt again, he brought old photos. The kids were delighted. Liam felt a slight pang. "This Matt is the star of the school, right?" he said, cutting himself another piece of pie. Emily looked at him, slightly surprised. "Well, he's just helping with the project." "And what?" "Nothing," he shrugged. "You just talk about him often." "He's a colleague, Liam," she replied, a little sharper than she intended. "We work together." "I know," he said, softening his tone. "I just noticed that you smile when you talk about him." Emily fell silent, looking at him. Her smile disappeared, and for a second there was silence in the kitchen. She was not angry, but his words hurt her not because they were unfair, but because she herself did not notice it. "I smile because I like my work," she finally said, "and the people there are good. This is all." Liam nodded without arguing. He didn't want to quarrel, and he didn't see the point in it. But the sting he felt didn't go away. It was not a suspicion, but simply a feeling that something was slipping from his hands slowly, almost imperceptibly. They finished the pie, and the evening passed as usual. She read a book, he watched TV. But the crack he noticed earlier became a little wider. Not because of Matt, not because of her words, but because they were both beginning to feel like the routine they had brought with them from Vancouver was still there. The move gave them a new home, but not a new start, not yet. The following days passed in the same rhythm. Emily and Matt continued to work on the project, their conversations becoming a little longer, a little warmer. He might accidentally touch her hand while handing over papers, and she wouldn't move away. She would joke about his historical seriousness, and he would respond with a look that contained more than just friendliness. It didn't cross the line, but it balanced on it, and Emily, without admitting it, enjoyed it. Liam, meanwhile, spent more and more time in the workshop. Working with Tom kept him busy, but at home he began to notice that Emily was coming home later, that her stories about the day increasingly revolved around school and Matt. He didn't ask, didn't probe. He just looked at her, listened, and thought that maybe it was just his imagination. But somewhere deep down, he knew that the silence of their home was no longer as comfortable as before. A shadow appeared in it, still small, but already noticeable. The autumn air became colder, and the forest outside the town was shrouded in a thin layer of fog, which in the mornings spread along the paths and clung to the branches of the pine trees. Emily was already accustomed to this view from the window of their house, but in recent days she noticed the beauty around her less and less. Her thoughts were elsewhere: work, the project with Matt, and how their conversations became more and more personal, more and more dangerous. She didn't plan this, didn't want it, but every time he looked at her with his gray eyes, or made another joke with a slight hint, she felt something light up inside her, something she hadn't felt for a long time. It all started with training. Mrs. Hart announced a retreat for teachers, 2 days in a small boarding house, an hour's drive from the town. The topic was boring: modern teaching methods in rural schools, but Emily decided to go. She wanted to be distracted, to breathe in fresh air outside the school walls. When it turned out that Matt had signed up too, she didn't think much of it, just another colleague to chat with on the road. Liam took her trip calmly. He was already used to the fact that her work sometimes required such trips, and even helped her pack her bag, throwing her favorite sweater in it. "Don't be too bored there," he said, kissing her forehead before leaving. "And bring me something tasty from their canteen." "I'll try," she smiled, but a shadow of tension flashed in her voice, which he did not notice. On Saturday morning, a school bus, an old yellow van, picked up a group of teachers. Emily sat by the window, watching the town disappear around the bend, and Matt took the seat next to her, carelessly throwing his bag on the floor. "Are you ready for 2 days of lectures and bad coffee?" he asked, leaning back in his seat. "If the coffee is worse than in the staff room, I'll quit," she replied, playing along with his tone. They chatted all the way about school, about the kids, about how Matt once got stuck in the snow on this highway when he drove here in the winter. His stories were lively, full of detail, and Emily found herself laughing more often than usual. She didn't notice how their knees accidentally touched as the bus bounced over bumps, or how his gaze lingered on her a little longer than necessary. The boarding house turned out to be modest. Several wooden houses surrounded by forest, with a common dining room and a lecture hall. The first day went predictably: boring presentations, tea breaks, group discussions. Emily and Matt found themselves on the same team, and their collaboration on the assignment to create a lesson with elements of local history only added to the ease that already existed between them. In the evening, when the lectures ended, the teachers went to their rooms, but Matt suggested they go for a walk. "There's a lake not far from here," he said, standing at the exit from the dining room. "Shall we go and have a look? After all that sitting, it won't hurt to stretch." Emily hesitated for a second, but nodded. "Okay, just for a little while. I'm tired." They walked along a narrow path, illuminated by the pale light of the moon breaking through the trees. The air was cold, and she pulled her sweater tighter around her. Matt walked nearby, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and told something about the lake, how local fishermen once held competitions there. His voice was soothing, but at the same time awakened some strange excitement in her. When they reached the shore, the lake lay before them, dark and motionless, reflecting the stars. Emily stopped, looking at the water, and suddenly felt Matt approach. He didn't say anything, just stood there, and the silence between them became thick, almost tangible. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked quietly, looking at her and not at the lake. "Yes," she answered without turning around. Her heart was beating faster, and she knew she had to walk away, say something neutral, break the moment. But instead, she turned to him. His gaze was warm, but there was something else in it, a desire that he no longer hid. He stepped closer, and Emily didn't back down. When his hand touched her cheek, she froze, and then, as if succumbing to some impulse, she leaned towards him. Their lips met, tentatively at first, almost by accident, and then with sudden greed, as if they had both been waiting for this longer than they were willing to admit. The kiss didn't last long, but it left her trembling not from cold, but from a mixture of excitement and horror. She pulled away, looking at him with wide eyes. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but her voice was shaking. "I know," he answered, without looking away. "But you wanted this too." Emily didn't answer. She turned away, wrapped her arms around herself, and walked back to the boarding house. Matt didn't stop her, but his footsteps were soon heard behind her. They returned in silence, and the rest of the evening passed in a blur. She sat in her room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. The next day, the training continued, but Emily was distracted. She avoided Matt, trying not to meet his gaze, but he did not press. He behaved as usual, joked with his colleagues, and discussed assignments. Only once, when they happened to be next to each other at the coffee table, he said quietly, "If you want, we can forget about yesterday. It's your decision." She nodded, but deep down she knew that she couldn't forget. In the evening, after dinner, when everyone had left, she found herself alone with him again, not by chance, but because she wanted it. They sat in the empty dining room, where the lamplight cast soft shadows on the wooden walls. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, looking at her hands. "I have a husband, Matt. I love him. I'm not asking you to leave him," he replied, leaning closer. "I just want to be with you. At least a little." Those words should have repulsed her, but instead they ignited something inside, a thirst for newness that she had suppressed for too long. When he kissed her again, she didn't resist. They left the dining room for his room, and there, in the twilight, amid the silence of the forest, Emily crossed the line for the first time. It was not just a kiss, it was a real betrayal, full of passion and desperate haste. His hands slid over her body, and she responded with the same greed, forgetting about everything about Liam, about the house, about who she was up to this moment. When it was over, they lay in the dark and reality began to seep back in like cold air through the cracks in a window. Emily got up, dressed silently, and went to her room. She lay awake all night, torn between the guilt that clutched her chest and the excitement that still pulsed through her veins. She was ashamed, but at the same time she couldn't deny that it was like a breath of life after months or years' routine. The next morning the bus took them back to the town. Emily sat by the window, looking at the passing trees, and Matt took a seat at the other end of the salon. They didn't talk, but she felt his presence, like a shadow that would now always be with her. When she returned home, Liam greeted her with a smile, holding a mug of coffee. "Well, did you survive?" he asked, hugging her. "Yes," she answered, forcing herself to smile. "I'm just tired." "Go rest," he said, not noticing how her hands were shaking slightly. "I'll cook something." Emily nodded and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. She sat on the bed, looking at her palms, and for the first time in a long time she cried quietly, silently, so that Liam wouldn't hear. She was torn apart. Love for him, guilt for what she had done, and a strange, frightening desire that pulled her back to Matt. She didn't know what would happen next, but she understood that there was no turning back. Liam, meanwhile, was busy in the kitchen, whistling a tune. He noticed that Emily looked strange paler than usual, with a hint of fatigue under her eyes. But he chalked it up to training, long lectures, and poor sleep. He did not suspect anything, did not see the crack that now lay between them deeper and wider than before. For him, it was just another day, but for her, it was the beginning of something new, frightening and inevitable. The silence in the house became thicker, almost tangible, like the fog that enveloped the forest outside the windows every morning. Emily returned from training 2 days ago, and since then Liam had noticed changes in her small, subtle, but alarming. She was quieter than usual, often lost in thought, staring into space, and her smiles seemed forced, as if she was wearing them like a mask. He chalked it up to fatigue, to adapting to a new place, but somewhere in the depths of his mind, a faint glimmer of doubt began to smolder, the same one that he first felt when she started mentioning Matt. The morning started as usual. Emily left for school, leaving an empty tea mug on the table and the slight scent of her perfume floral, with a hint of vanilla. Liam stayed at home. He had nothing to do in the workshop until lunch and decided to do some minor repairs. He was fixing a creaking step on the stairs when he heard a phone vibrate her phone. She forgot it on the kitchen table, which in itself was strange. Emily always took it with her, even if she wasn't expecting calls. He wasn't going to check. It was not in his habits to rummage through her things, look for something. They trusted each other, or at least he thought so. But the phone vibrated again, and curiosity, or maybe that same glimmer of doubt, pushed him to stand up and take a look. The screen glowed, showing a notification of a new message. The contact name was short. M. No last name, no explanation. The message read, "You're kind of thoughtful today. Everything is fine." Liam froze, holding the phone in his hands. His fingers tightened slightly around the case, but he didn't open the chat, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid of what he might see. M could mean anything: a colleague, a friend, even a casual acquaintance. But a name immediately popped into her head that she had mentioned far too often: Matt. He put the phone back on the table, face down, and returned to the stairs, but his thoughts were already spinning like gears in an old engine. He wasn't jealous. In the 6 years of their relationship, he had no reason to suspect Emily of anything serious. They quarreled, of course, but they always made up, and their closeness seemed indestructible to him. But the last weeks, her animated stories about school, the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about work, and this strange detachment after the training formed a mosaic that he could not yet put together entirely. He brushed the thought aside, driving another nail into the step with more force than necessary, but the message from M stayed with him like a thorn under his skin. Emily returned home late in the evening. Liam was in the living room, leafing through an old car magazine he found in the shed. She walked in, dropping her bag by the door, and smiled at him that same forced smile he was beginning to notice. "Hello," she said, taking off her coat. "How is the day?" "Fine," he answered, without looking up from the magazine. "Fixed the stairs. And you?" "An ordinary day," she shrugged, heading towards the kitchen. The children drew a sawmill. It turned out funny. She walked past the table and Liam heard her freeze. He looked up to see her take the phone, quickly check the screen, and put it in her pocket. Her movements were a little harsher than usual, and this only increased his anxiety. "You forgot it this morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "I called a couple of times." Emily turned around and her face tensed for a second, but she immediately relaxed. "Oh, right, thanks for not touching me," she answered with a slight laugh. "These are probably colleagues. We are in constant commotion with the project there." "Yeah," he nodded, returning to the magazine. "Project with Matt, huh?" She froze again, but nodded quickly. "Well, yes, with him and others. We're almost done." Liam didn't pursue the topic. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to turn this into an interrogation. But her words, her tone, all this only added fuel to the fire of his doubts. He watched her potter around in the kitchen, pouring herself some tea, and thought that maybe he was just making things up. Maybe it really is a colleague and nothing more. But and her thoughtfulness in the message haunted him. Liam decided to watch the next few days. Don't check, don't spy, just watch. He was not ready for a scandal. He did not want to accuse her without evidence. He needed facts, something concrete to either confirm his fears or dispel them. He began to pay attention to little things. How she holds the phone, how quickly she puts it away when he enters the room, how long he stays after work. On Wednesday evening, she returned later than usual. Liam was in the shed, sorting out an old toolbox, when he heard the door creak. He went out onto the porch, wiping his hands with a rag, and saw her hair was slightly disheveled. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. "Are you late?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes," she answered, taking off her scarf. "In the teacher's room, we discussed plans for the next week. Time has flown by." With Matt, he burst out, and he immediately regretted his tone. Emily looked at him, narrowing her eyes. "With him and the others, Liam. What kind of question?" "I just asked," he shrugged, trying to smooth out the awkwardness. "You often talk about him." "Because we work together," she said, walking past him into the house. "You're not asking me about Tom when I ask how things are going in the workshop." "Tom doesn't text me," he muttered, but quietly so that she wouldn't hear. She went into the kitchen, and he remained on the porch, looking at the dark forest. Her answer was logical, but something in it, in this slight harshness, only strengthened his suspicions. He didn't argue, didn't push. Instead, he decided to wait to give her a chance to either explain or give herself away. The next day, Liam had to go to the workshop early in the morning. Tom asked for help with the truck, which had a bad engine, and he left, leaving Emily to get ready for school. When he returned home for lunch, she was no longer there, but the phone was again on the table apparently. She had forgotten it again in a hurry. It was strange. She had never been so absent-minded before. He looked at it for several minutes, struggling with himself. This was her personal space, and he didn't want to violate it. But curiosity or fear overpowered. He took the phone, entered the password, the same one she had used for years, the day they first met, and opened the messages. Chat with M. Was right in plain sight, and Liam clicked it, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. The messages were short, but their tone made him frown. "M. You're kind of thoughtful today. Everything is fine." Emily. "Yes, I'm just tired. The training was exhausting." M. "I hope you don't regret that evening." Emily. "I don't know. It's complicated." M. "If you want to talk, I'm here." The last message was from yesterday evening. M. "I saw you in the teacher's room today. You looked beautiful." Liam put the phone back, feeling his stomach tighten. This was not direct evidence, no confessions, no outright hints. But the tone, this intimacy in the words, this evening, all this screamed that between Emily and M. There was something more than work. He didn't know who M was, but the only name that came to mind was Matt. He did not dig further, did not read other chats. This was enough for him to understand that something was happening. But instead of storming into the school, causing a scene, or calling her screaming, he decided to remain silent. He wanted to know more. He wanted to see with his own eyes whether it was just his fantasy or reality that was ruining their lives. That evening, Emily returned home smiling, but Liam noticed that her eyes were slightly red, as if she had been crying or simply hadn't gotten enough sleep. She dropped her bag at the door and went into the kitchen, where he was already heating up dinner potatoes and meat, nothing special. "How are you?" she asked, sitting down at the table. "Okay," he replied, placing the plate in front of her. "I was in the workshop. And you?" "An ordinary day," she said, picking at her food with a fork. The children were noisy, as always. "The project is almost ready." "With Matt?" he asked, looking into her eyes. She looked up, and for a second her hand hovered over the plate. "Yes, with him too," she answered, a little sharper than necessary. "Liam, are you talking about this again? What's wrong with you?" "Nothing," he said, looking away. "I'm just interested in your work." She snorted, but didn't argue. They ate in silence, and Liam watched her, how she avoided his gaze, how quickly she put her phone in her pocket when it vibrated. He didn't tell her about the messages, didn't show her that he knew. But now he was sure that something was wrong. Over the next few days, Liam became more attentive. He noticed how she lingered after class, how her phone increasingly remained in her hands and not on the table. He didn't ask, didn't press, he just looked. One evening, she said she was going to a teacher meeting and left, leaving him alone. He waited until her steps died down on the street and followed her out, not close so that she wouldn't notice, but at a distance, hiding behind the trees. He saw her reach the school, but instead of entering the main building, she turned towards the annex where the teacher's lounge was. There stood a man tall, in a dark jacket, with light gray hair at the temples. They talked for a few minutes, and Liam noticed her laughing and him touching her shoulder. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make his heart ache. He returned home before her, lay down in bed, and pretended to be asleep when she entered. She lay down next to him, but did not hug him as before. Liam lay with his eyes closed, listening to her breathing, and thought about what to do next. He didn't want a scandal, didn't want to lose her. But he knew that he could no longer ignore this crack. It had become an abyss, and he stood on its edge, not knowing whether to jump or retreat. The forest outside the windows of Liam and Emily's house became thinner, and the days shorter as autumn gave way to the first hints of winter. A cold wind blew fallen leaves through the empty streets of the town, and Liam increasingly found solace in work. Tom's workshop became his refuge. The smell of oil, the creaking of metal, the roar of engines, all this drowned out the thoughts that had been spinning in his head since he saw the messages from M. And that scene in the teacher's lounge. He didn't talk to Emily about it, didn't make a scene, but his silent observation turned into a plan, slow, careful, but decisive. He wanted the truth, and he was going to get it. It all started with a chance meeting. Liam was in a local store, buying coffee and a couple of beers, when he overheard two men talking at the counter. One of them, a thin guy with disheveled hair and a camera around his neck, was arguing with the owner of the shop, an old man with a beard whom Liam already knew as Jim. "Jim, I'm telling you, this film is gold," the guy said, waving his arms. "I shot the sunset over the lake. Such shots happen once in a lifetime." "No one will buy your sunsets, Sam," Jim snorted, checking out his purchases at the checkout counter. "Shoot something useful, not these artistic things of yours." Liam walked closer, throwing his purchases onto the counter, and nodded at Sam. "Are you a photographer?" he asked, trying to sound friendly. Sam turned to him, narrowing his eyes slightly, but then smiled. "Yeah, something like that. Sam Carter. I photograph everything from landscapes to weddings. Who are you?" "New in town, huh?" "Liam," he replied, shaking the outstretched hand. "I moved recently, working with Tom in the workshop." "Oh, mechanic," Sam nodded. "Cool. And I'm a local weirdo with a camera." If you need to remove something, please contact us. Liam nodded, but an idea was already forming in his head. He wasn't sure if he should trust this guy, but Sam seemed open and his camera was exactly what he needed right now. They started talking, and after a few minutes, Liam suggested they go to a cafe across the street, supposedly to drink coffee and chat. Sam agreed, clearly pleased with the new acquaintance. The cafe was small, with worn wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. They sat by the window, and Liam ordered 2 black ones while Sam fiddled with the camera, wiping the lens with a cloth. "So what do you live for besides cars?" Sam asked, taking a sip. "Our town is quiet. You quickly start to get bored here." "Yeah, well, my wife and I are settling in," Liam answered, looking into his cup. "She works at school as a teacher." "Oh, cool," Sam said. "My sister was also at school until she left. How about yours? Does she like it here?" "I guess so," Liam nodded, but his voice became a little quieter. "She spends a lot of time there, with colleagues, all sorts of projects." Sam chuckled, not noticing the change in tone. "Teachers are like that, always in business. Aren't you bored alone?" "It happens," Liam said, and fell silent, thinking about how to approach the main thing. Finally, he made up his mind. "Listen, Sam, do you take pictures of people? Well, not weddings, but unnoticed?" Sam raised an eyebrow, but wasn't wary. "Unnoticed? Some kind of surveillance, or what? I can if necessary. I have a telephoto lens. If I take it from a distance, no one will notice." "What? Do you need someone?" Liam took a sip of coffee to buy time. "Yes, I have one thought," he began cautiously. "I want to check something. Nothing serious, just curiosity. I'll pay if necessary." Sam leaned back in his chair, looking at him with interest. "Curiosity, you mean? Well, I'm not a cop, but if you need some pictures, I can help." "Who is the object?" Liam hesitated. If he had mentioned Emily's name, it could have ruined everything. Rumors spread quickly in the town. But he decided to take a chance, leaving the details blurry. "My wife," he said finally, "and one of her colleagues. I just want to know what they do after work. No noise, no problems." Sam whistled, but his smile didn't fade. "Wow, family matters. Okay, I don't meddle in other people's things. Tell me where and when, and I'll take it. Just don't tell Jim, or he'll think I'm a spy." We agreed. Liam nodded, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. "Tomorrow after school. She sometimes goes to a cafe on the main street. With a colleague. This is with that historian, right?" Sam asked casually. "So tall, with gray hair." Liam froze, looking at him. "Do you know him?" "I saw it a couple of times," Sam shrugged. "He was sitting in a cafe with someone. I was there filming a window for advertising. I don't remember with whom, but he stands out." Liam nodded, trying not to show his tension. It was Matt, he was sure, and now he had an ally who could give him proof. The next day, Liam waited for a call from Sam. He told Emily he was going to the workshop and drove off, but instead stood in an alley near the school, watching from afar. Emily left the building around 4, and he noticed how she headed towards the cafe not alone, but with a man whom he had already seen at the staff room. They walked side by side, laughing, and Liam felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel. He called Sam. "They're in the cafe," he said briefly. "Can you drive up?" "Already there," Sam answered. "I'm sitting across the road with a lens. Give me half an hour." Liam waited, sitting in the car, watching time pass unbearably slowly. His thoughts were confused. He wanted to be wrong. He wanted this to be just a friendly meeting. But every time he remembered the messages from him, his hope faded. Finally, the phone vibrated and Sam sent a message. "Done. Meet me at the shop in an hour." When Liam arrived at the shop, Sam was already waiting for him, sitting on a bench with a camera in his hands. He looked happy, like a cat who had caught a mouse. "Here," he said, handing Liam an envelope with photographs. "I took it from the street, through the window. The quality is good, faces are visible." Liam took the envelope, but didn't open it right away. His fingers trembled, and he hid them in his jacket pockets. "How much do I owe?" he asked. Come on, Sam waved his hand. Consider it a friendly favor. But if you need anything else, call me. Thanks, Liam nodded, and Sam left, whistling something cheerful. Liam got into the car, and only there he decided to open the envelope. There were several pictures inside, Emily and Matt at a table in a cafe. In the first one, they were just sitting there looking at each other. In the second, she was laughing, and he was leaning a little closer to her than necessary. On the third, his hand lay on her arm, a light touch, but too intimate for colleagues. In the last photo, they were leaving the cafe, and Matt was holding her elbow while she said something, smiling. Liam looked at the photos, feeling his insides go cold. It wasn't direct evidence of betrayal, no kissing, no hugging, but it was more than friendship. It was a look, gestures, this damned intimacy that should not exist between a wife and someone else. He put the pictures back into the envelope and squeezed it in his hands, as if he wanted to crush it. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he drove into the workshop, where Tom was working on a tractor, and silently began to help. Work distracted me, but didn't save me. His mind was full of questions. What to do next? Should I tell her? Show photos? Or continue to observe until there is something irrefutable? He didn't want to lose her, but he couldn't live in this limbo anymore. When he returned home, Emily was already there, preparing dinner. She looked calm, almost happy, and this only made his pain worse. "How are you?" she asked, stirring something in a frying pan. "Okay," he answered, throwing his jacket on the chair. "I was in the workshop." "Okay," she nodded. "I went to a cafe today after work. I chatted with a colleague." "With Matt?" he asked, and his voice was even, but everything was boiling inside. "Yes," she answered without turning around. "He was talking about some old book that he found. It was interesting." Liam nodded but didn't say anything. He looked at her familiar movements, at her blonde hair escaping from the elastic, and thought about the photographs lying in the pocket of his jacket. He didn't bother to get them, didn't shout. He simply sat down at the table and waited for dinner, deciding that he would remain silent for now. But now he knew. These were not just suspicions. This was a truth that he was not yet ready to fully accept. There was a school open day in town, an event Emily had been talking about all week. She wanted Liam to come and see her class and meet her students and colleagues. He agreed, although he was still tormented by doubts inside, reinforced by the photographs he hid in a drawer of his desk in the shed. He didn't know what he expected from this day, maybe to see Matt with his own eyes, maybe to find at least some hint to understand how to proceed. Emily left early to get the class ready, and Liam arrived at the school around noon. The building was decorated with colorful flags, children's voices and laughter could be heard from the windows, and parents, teachers, and students had already gathered in the courtyard. Liam parked the car on the side of the road and got out, putting his hands in his jacket pockets. He felt like a stranger among this bustle, not because he did not know people, but because his thoughts were far from the holiday. He walked through the yard, nodding to rare acquaintances, neighbors he met in the store, or Tom's clients, and headed towards the main entrance. Inside, the school was buzzing. Children ran along the corridors, showing their parents their drawings and crafts. Teachers smiled, handing out paper cups of juice. Liam found Emily's classroom on the first floor. The door was open, and he saw her standing by the board. She was explaining something to a group of parents, pointing to the children's work pinned to the wall. Her face glowed with enthusiasm, and for a second he almost forgot about his suspicions. Almost. "Liam," she called out, noticing him at the door. "Come here, I'll introduce you to the children." He entered, forcing himself to smile, and Emily led him to a gaggle of students, who immediately began vying with each other to tell how they drew the sawmill and made up ghost stories. Liam nodded, listened, even praised a couple of drawings, but his gaze kept darting around the room, looking for someone he had not yet seen in person, Matt. But he wasn't there. Not yet. After the parents left, Emily pulled Liam towards the staff room. "Let's go have some coffee," she said. "All of our people gathered there." He nodded, although everything inside was tense. The staff room was full of people. Mrs. Hart was pouring tea. Miss Green was grumbling at one of her colleagues, and in the corner stood a tall man with dark hair slightly touched with gray. Liam immediately recognized him from the photographs as Matt. He was holding a mug and was saying something to a young teacher who laughed at his words. Emily walked up to the coffee table without looking at Matt, but Liam noticed how he glanced at her briefly, quick, almost imperceptible, but full of some hidden meaning. "This is Liam, my husband," Emily said, introducing him to Mrs. Hart. "Liam, these are our teachers. You've probably already heard about them." Matt turned to them, and his smile widened. "Liam, huh? Nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Emily told me a lot about you." Liam shook his hand, trying not to squeeze it any tighter than necessary. Matt's palm was warm, and his voice was confident, with the same husky quality that Liam imagined when reading messages from him. "And about you too," he answered, looking into Matt's eyes. "You seem to be a historian." "Yeah," Matt nodded. "I try not to let the children forget what happened before the internet." Emily laughed, and Liam noticed her hand shake slightly as she took the mug. The conversation did not last long. Matt quickly returned to his interlocutor, and Emily led Liam to the table with snacks. But that short exchange of glances stayed with him like a bitter taste on his tongue. Liam decided not to linger in the staff room. He told Emily he wanted to see the other classes and walked out into the hallway, feeling the air become lighter without her there. He wandered around the school, looking into the rooms where the children were showing their projects, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He saw Matt, saw how he carried himself confidently, almost brazenly, and this only strengthened his suspicions. But he still didn't know what to do with this knowledge. In one of the corridors, he came across a woman who was standing at the window, looking at the courtyard. She was short, with short brown hair and tired eyes. She held a paper cup in her hands, but did not drink from it, but simply swirled it in her fingers. Liam was about to walk past, but she turned around and suddenly smiled. "Are you also hiding from the noise?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but with a slight hoarseness, as if she had recently cried. Liam stopped, slightly surprised. "Something like that," he replied, just looking around. "What about you?" "I'm waiting for my husband," she said, nodding towards the yard. "He's a teacher here, and I'm Sarah." "Liam," he introduced himself, shaking her hand. "My wife works here too. Emily teaches literature." Sarah nodded, and her smile became a little warmer. "Oh, I heard about her. New girl, huh?" Matt said she fit in great. Liam froze, but tried not to show his tension. "Matt?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Is this your husband?" "Yeah," Sarah confirmed, looking out the window. "Matt Crawford. Historian. You've probably seen him, he's always the center of attention." "Yes, we just met." Liam nodded, feeling how everything was shrinking inside. Sarah was Matt's wife, a woman who probably didn't even know what was happening. Or did you suspect? They fell silent, and Liam noticed how her fingers tightened their grip on the glass. She looked tired, but not from the holiday. Her fatigue was deeper, as if something was gnawing at her from the inside. He decided to risk starting a conversation that could either ruin everything or give him an ally. "How long have you been living here?" he asked, leaning against the windowsill next to her. "About 15, she answered. "Matt was born here, and I came with him after university. We have 2 children, so this town is our home." "Sounds cozy," Liam said. "Emily and I just moved. We're still getting used to it." "It's normal," she smiled. "At first it seems that it's too quiet here, but then you get involved. Although," she hesitated, looking into the glass, "sometimes silence only makes things worse." "In terms of?" he asked, sensing that she wanted to say more. Sarah sighed, and her voice became quieter. "I don't know if I should say this to a stranger, but Matt has been different lately. He often stays late and goes somewhere after work. He says projects school, but I don't know. He used to always be home for dinner." Liam felt his heart beat faster. He looked at her, trying not to betray his thoughts, but everything was boiling inside. Sarah continued, not noticing his tension. "We have 2 boys, and they hardly see him," she said. "I ask what's wrong, but he waves it off. He says, I'm making it up. But I'm not blind. A woman always feels when something changes. Maybe it's just work. Liam said, although every word was difficult for him. Emily also has periods like this. Sarah looked at him, and a shadow of doubt flashed in her eyes. Maybe, she agreed, but I know him. It's not just a job. He moves away, and I don't know how to get it back. Liam nodded, feeling their conversation becoming a bridge between their shared concerns. He could tell her everything about the messages, about the photos, about seeing Matt with Emily. But he remained silent, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wasn't ready to destroy her world until he was ready to destroy his own. I understand, he said finally. Emily and I also get tense. Moving, new life, all this puts pressure. Sarah smiled, but her smile was bitter. Yes, new life. Sometimes it seems like it's taking us in different directions. They fell silent, looking out the window. In the yard, children played tag and teachers handed out cookies. Liam saw Emily in the distance, standing with a group of parents, laughing, and Matt appeared next to her, speaking into her ear. Sarah noticed them too, and her lips pressed into a thin line. They get along well, right? She said quietly, almost in a whisper. Seems like it, Liam replied, trying not to give away his tone. Work brings us together. Sarah nodded, but her gaze lingered on her husband and Emily a little longer than necessary. Liam realized that she felt something too. She didn't know. She hadn't seen the evidence, but she felt it. And at that moment, something like a silent agreement arose between them, an alliance built on mutual suspicions. You know, Liam, she said suddenly, turning to him, if you ever want to talk about, well, anything like that, call me. I'm not a gossip, it's just. Sometimes it's easier when someone understands. Thank you, he nodded, and you too, just in case. She took her phone out of her bag and handed it to him. Let me write down the number, she said. You never know. Liam dictated his number to her, and she sent him a short message, just Sarah, without further ado. They exchanged smiles, but there was no joy in them, only tired understanding. Liam spent the rest of the day wandering around the school, but his thoughts were on Sarah. She was just like him, confused, doubtful, but not ready for a direct confrontation. He saw her go home before Matt, the way her shoulders slumped slightly as she got into the car. Emily stayed until the end, helping clean up the classrooms, and Liam left alone, telling her he'd meet her home. When he returned, he took the photographs out of the drawer and laid them out on the table in the barn. He looked at Emily and Matt, at their smiles, at those damn touches, and thought about Sarah. She didn't know about the pictures, didn't know that he had seen them together, but her words, he's moving away, echoed in his head. They were in the same boat, albeit on opposite sides of the barricades, and now he had someone who could understand his pain, even without knowing the whole truth. Liam put the photos back and went into the house, where Emily soon appeared. She looked tired, but happy, and began to talk about the day, about the children, about the parents, about how everything went. She mentioned Matt in passing, but Liam noticed how her voice became a little livelier when she talked about him. Did you have a good time? She asked, taking off her coat. Yes, he answered, looking at her. I met a couple of people. Sarah, for example. Matt's wife. Emily froze for a second, but then smiled. Oh, Sarah, she's cute. Sometimes he comes to school. What did you discuss? Yes, just little things, he shrugged. About life here, about families. Great, she said, going into the kitchen. Glad you made friends with someone. Liam watched her leave, feeling his fingers curl into fists. He didn't tell her about Sarah, about her doubts, about how they were both standing on the edge of the same abyss. But now he had a plan, not to blame, not to shout, but to wait. With Sarah as an ally, he could learn more, see what Emily and Matt were hiding. And maybe together they will find a way to either save their families or realize that there is nothing left to save. The days were getting shorter, and twilight now came before dinner, enveloping the town in a soft but oppressive twilight. Inside the house, the atmosphere was also changing, not sharply, not obviously, but inexorably. Liam decided to play a game, subtle and calibrated, where every step he took was aimed at making Emily feel the weight of her secret without understanding where it came from. He didn't mean to shout, didn't want open confrontation. Instead, he chose silence, coldness, and control to throw her off balance. It all started unnoticed. On Monday morning, Liam was up earlier than usual, before Emily even opened her eyes. He silently prepared the coffee, but instead of pouring her a cup as before and leaving it on the table with a note, he drank it alone, looking out the window. When she came down to the kitchen, disheveled and sleepy, he was already washing his mug without turning around. "Good morning," she said, stretching. Her voice was soft, with its usual warmth, but Liam noticed a slight uncertainty in her tone. She already felt that something was wrong. "Morning," he answered briefly, without a smile, continuing to fidget at the sink. His voice was flat, almost mechanical, devoid of the usual softness that she knew. Emily frowned but didn't say anything. She walked over to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and sat down at the table, glancing at him briefly. Liam felt her attention, but did not react. He wiped his hands with a towel, took his jacket, and headed towards the door. "Are you going to the workshop?" she asked, trying to fill the silence. "Yes," he answered without looking at her. "I'll be back for dinner." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Emily was left alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where her mug and note usually sat. It was a small thing, but it pricked her, not painful, but enough to leave a mark. She brushed off the thought, attributing his behavior to fatigue or a bad mood, and left to get ready for school. But somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, a vague feeling arose something was wrong. Liam spent the day in the workshop, helping Tom with another car. Work was a distraction, but it didn't drown out his plan. He decided to become colder, more collected, to turn into a shadow of the man he used to be, not rude, not angry, but simply distant. He knew Emily better than anyone, her habits, her weaknesses, her ability to feel guilty even for things she didn't do. And now he was going to use it against her without showing his cards. When he returned home, Emily was already there, preparing dinner. She was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pan, and turned around when she heard his footsteps. "Hello," she said with a smile, but a shadow of uncertainty flashed in her eyes. "How is the day?" "Okay," he replied, taking off his jacket and hanging it on a hook with the same methodical precision with which he had done everything in recent days. "And you?" "That's okay, too," she said, but her voice trembled. "The kids were noisy today, but I managed. Matt helped with the project, and it was finally finished." Liam nodded without looking up. He walked to the table, sat down, and opened the magazine he had left in the morning, an old issue about cars that he had already read dozens of times. Mentioning Matt no longer made him angry. It was just part of the game now. He didn't ask about it, didn't give the slightest hint that the name meant anything. Instead, he was silent, and that silence was louder than any words. Emily put the plates on the table, mashed potatoes with meat, her attempt to return to her usual comfort. She sat down opposite him, looking at him. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, unable to stand his silence. "You're somehow not like that today." Liam looked up, his eyes cold but calm. "It's okay," he said, cutting off a piece of meat. "I'm just tired." She nodded, but her fingers clenched her fork nervously. His answer was logical, but there was no warmth in it. There was no that familiar spark that always softened his words. They ate in silence, broken only by the clinking of dishes, and Emily felt an incomprehensible pressure building in her chest. She didn't understand why he was behaving this way, but her conscience, the one that she had tried to drown out after the training, after Matt, began to stir. Over the next few days, Liam continued his game. He did not hug her before bed, as before, but lay with his back, looking at the wall. He didn't ask about her day with a genuine interest that was part of their routine, but limited himself to short, "How are you?" and immediately went about his business, fixing something in the barn, leafing through a magazine, watching TV with the sound turned off. He became more collected and neat. He folded his things with almost military precision, washed the dishes immediately after eating, answered her questions evenly and without unnecessary words. It was not anger, Not resentment, it was a wall that he built slowly and methodically. Emily began to notice this more and more. On Wednesday evening, she was sitting on the couch with a book, but her eyes kept wandering to Liam, who was fixing an old lantern at the table. His movements were clear, focused, and he didn't look at her not even once. "Liam," she called quietly, closing the book. "Can we talk?" He raised his head, but his face remained expressionless. "About what?" he asked, putting down the screwdriver. "About you," she said, trying to hide the trembling in her voice. You're something else. Did something happen?" He paused, looking into her eyes, and this pause was as heavy as a stone. "Nothing happened," he finally answered. "Just busy with thoughts. Work, you know." "Job?" she asked, feeling her heart squeezing. "Are you sure this is all?" "I'm sure," he said, and his voice was as cold as the wind outside the window. "What do you have?" "Everything is fine." She hesitated, not expecting him to turn the conversation to her. Her guilt, hidden deep inside, suddenly surfaced, and she looked away. "Yes, everything is fine," she answered, but her words sounded unconvincing even to herself. "It's just, you scare me a little when you're so silent." Liam smiled slightly, not the warm, familiar smile, but something sharp, almost alien. "I didn't want to scare you," he said, returning to the lantern. "I'm just thinking about my own things." Emily looked at him, feeling her chest tighten with an incomprehensible feeling, a mixture of fear, guilt, and confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, but his coldness, his detachment hit the target. She began to wonder, did he notice something? Does he know? Or is it just her imagination, fueled by her own secret? At school, her thoughts were also confused. She saw Matt every day in the staff room, in the hallways, during breaks, and their connection, which began at the training, continued to smolder. They did not discuss it openly, but their glances, casual touches, short conversations after lessons were full of the same tension as that night. Emily was still torn between excitement and guilt, but now a new feeling was added to this: anxiety. Liam's behavior unsettled her, and she couldn't figure out whether it had to do with her cheating, or just his own demons. One evening, returning home later than usual, she found Liam in the kitchen. He stood at the stove, cooking something simple, bacon and eggs, and his movements were as precise as ever. She threw her bag on a chair and walked up to him. "Are you cooking?" she asked, trying to bring lightness into her voice. "Yes," he answered without turning around. "I decided not to wait." These words stung her more than she expected. He used to wait for her with dinner, even if she was late. It was their little tradition. Now he was cooking for himself, and this was another brick in the wall he was building. "I could help," she said, stepping closer. "No need," he snapped, still not looking at her. "I can handle it." Emily froze, feeling her cheeks heat up. She wanted to ask, to shout, to demand an explanation, but instead she silently went into the living room. Her conscience was screaming louder than ever, but she couldn't connect his coldness with what she had done. He didn't accuse, he didn't hint, he was just different, and it drove her crazy. Liam, meanwhile, enjoyed the results of his game, not out of sadistic pleasure, but out of a kind of grim satisfaction. He saw how she was lost, how her confidence melted with every cold word, every indifferent glance. He didn't know how far he would go, but so far it was working. She began to doubt, get nervous, and her guilt, which she had hidden, slowly came out. He didn't reveal that he knew about Matt, about the photos, about her lies. He just kept her in limbo, where his every gesture was like a mirror reflecting her own sins. One night she tried to break this wall. They were lying in bed, and Emily turned to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Liam," she whispered, "tell me what's wrong. I see that you are not okay." He didn't answer immediately, allowing the silence to become unbearable. Then he slowly turned to her, and his eyes in the darkness were cold as ice. "It's okay, Emily," he said quietly, but with such confidence that she shuddered. "Sleep." She removed her hand, feeling tears welling up in her eyes, but held back. Her heart was pounding, and she realized that she could no longer pretend that nothing was happening. But she didn't know how to start a conversation without revealing herself. Liam closed his eyes, knowing that his game was working better than he expected. He didn't want to break her, he wanted her to come to him with the truth, and he was ready to wait as long as necessary. Winter has tightly wrapped the town in a blanket of snow, turning the narrow streets into white paths, and the forest behind Liam and Emily's house into a silent, frozen picture. The cold crept into homes, into hearts, and even into those stolen moments that Emily and Matt snatched for themselves. Their connection, which began as a flash of passion at training, continued secret meetings, quick glances in the staff room, rare messages from M. But the romance that once fueled her began to fade, giving way to tension and doubt. Liam remained cool and collected at home, his game continuing with the same relentless precision. He didn't accuse, didn't ask, but his silence, his detachment weighed on Emily more than any words. She felt guilty, confused, and this feeling only intensified when she left for her next meeting with Matt. Her life was divided into two parts: the house, where icy silence reigned, and these secret meetings, which promised warmth, but increasingly left her devastated. One Thursday, after school, Emily met Matt in an old barn on the outskirts of town. This was their new refuge, an abandoned place where no one appeared, with rickety walls and the smell of damp wood. They found it by accident a couple of weeks ago when they were looking for somewhere to hide from prying eyes, and since then they have used it for their meetings. But today, as she stepped inside, brushing the snow off her boots, her heart didn't beat faster with anticipation. Instead, she felt tired. Matt was already there, sitting on an old box with a cigarette in his hand. Smoke rose to the ceiling, mixing with the cold air, and his face, illuminated by the dim light of the lantern, looked tense. "You're late," he said, taking a drag. His voice was harsher than usual, without the softness that had once captivated her. "I was late with class," she answered, closing the door behind her. The children didn't want to leave. He nodded but didn't smile. Emily came closer, but did not sit next to her as before, but remained standing with her arms crossed over her chest. Her coat was damp from the snow, and she could feel the cold creeping under her skin. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing his frown. "Not really," he said, throwing the cigarette on the floor and putting it out with his shoe. "Sarah asked again where I was yesterday. I had to get out. This is starting to get boring." Emily looked at him, feeling something clench inside her. She knew that he had a family, a wife, children, but before he spoke about it easily, as if it were something distant. There was irritability in his voice now, and it scared her. "What did you tell her?" she asked quietly. "That I was at school," he shrugged. She didn't believe it, but didn't argue. "Bye." Emily nodded, looking down at her boots. Her own lies to Liam had become habitual, stayed late in the staff room, discussing a project. But every time she uttered those words, her guilt became heavier. And now, looking at Matt, she began to wonder, what was all this for? "How are you doing?" he asked, finally looking at her. "Is Liam still silent?" "Yes," she answered, her voice almost a whisper. He doesn't say anything directly, but I feel like he knows. Or he suspects. It's unbearable." Matt stood up, striding towards her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then why do we continue?" he asked, and a mixture of fatigue and challenge flashed in his eyes. "If it torments you so much, why are you here?" Emily pulled away, feeling his words hit where it hurt most. "Because I don't know how to stop," she admitted, her voice trembling. You were something new. But now I'm not sure it's worth it." He frowned, crossing his arms. "Worth what? Your marriage? My family? We both knew what we were getting into, Emily." "They knew," she agreed, but her tone became harsher. "But I didn't think it would be so hard. I thought it would be more than just meetings in the barn." Matt fell silent, looking at her. His face tensed, and she realized that her words had hurt him. But he didn't argue. Instead, he stepped closer and tried to hug her. Emily didn't resist, but she didn't respond with the same passion as before. His lips found hers, and the kiss was hot, almost desperate, but it did not have the magic that she remembered from the training. It was more like an attempt to prove something to myself, to her, to both of them. When he pulled away, she looked into his eyes and felt empty. "It's not what it was before," she said quietly. "Because we're both tired of hiding," he answered, his voice hoarse. "But I still want you, Emily. This means something." "Maybe," she said, looking away, "but I'm not sure that this is enough." They stood in silence, broken only by the creaking of old boards in the wind. Emily felt her doubts, which she had suppressed for weeks, finally bursting out. Matt was attractive, charming, but what had started out as an adventure now seemed like a trap to her. She no longer saw a future in this, only risk, pain, and endless lies. The following meetings only strengthened her doubts. They saw each other a couple more times in the same barn, in Matt's car on an empty road outside the city, but each time the tension between them grew. Matt became harsher, his jokes made her smile less often, and his touch began to seem more like a habit than a desire. He talked about how Sarah suspected he was having to get out of it, and it only made her feel more guilty. She herself lied to Liam every day, and his coldness at home became a mirror of her own deception. One evening, after another meeting, Emily returned home late. Liam sat in the living room, staring at the TV with the sound off, his usual position in recent weeks. She dropped her bag at the door and walked past him, trying not to make eye contact. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp as a blade. "At school," she lied without turning around. "I was late with the papers." He nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "I see," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her heart clench. She went into the bedroom, feeling tears burning her eyes. Lying had become second nature to her, but she could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Matt, who had once seemed like an escape from her routine, was now part of the problem. Their meetings became meaningless, and the tension between them only grew. She began to question whether he was worth her marriage, her life with Liam, even if that life had become cold and distant. The next time they met in a cafe, the same one where Liam had once seen them in photographs, although Emily did not know about it. It was her idea. She was tired of the barn, of the darkness and cold. They sat at a table by the window, ordering coffee, but not touching it. Snow was falling behind the glass, and it was quiet inside, only the heater was humming. "We can't continue like this," she said suddenly, looking at her hands. "It doesn't work, Matt." He frowned, taking a sip of his cold coffee. "What doesn't work? We? Or is it that we are hiding?" "That's it," she answered, her voice firmer than she expected. "I thought it would give me something more. But I'm just losing myself. And Liam." Matt looked at her, a mixture of irritation and pain flashing in his eyes. "What did you expect?" he asked. "That we will run away together. We have families, Emily. It was always risky." "I know," she said, feeling her voice shake, "but I didn't expect it to become so empty. We don't enjoy it anymore. It's just stress." He fell silent, looking out the window. Her words hung in the air, heavy and truthful. The romance is gone, leaving behind only fatigue and fear of exposure. Matt still wanted her, she could see it in his eyes, but even he couldn't deny that their connection had become more of a burden than a joy. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked finally. "Finish?" Emily didn't answer right away. She thought about Liam, about his coldness, about the way he looks at her as if he knows everything, but is silent. She thought about how her life with him had become foreign, but was still her life. And she thought about Matt, how he had awakened something in her that she hadn't felt in a long time, but now that feeling had faded. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I can't do this anymore. I need to understand what I really want." Matt nodded, his face grim. "Okay," he said. "Think about it. But if you decide to leave, tell me. I don't want to be left in the cold." She stood up, leaving the coffee untouched, and left without looking back. The snow crunched under her feet, and her thoughts swirled like snowflakes in the wind. She doubted Matt, their romance, whether it was worth the pain she had caused herself and possibly Liam. But she wasn't ready to let him go yet, not completely. Her heart was still breaking, and she knew that a decision would have to be made soon, before this secret destroyed everything around her. The snowfall in the town had become thicker, and the streets were now drowned in white, muffling the sounds and creating the illusion of peace that was missing from the hearts of Liam and Sarah. Their chance meeting at an open day grew into something more, a silent alliance built on shared suspicions and unspoken pain. They didn't share everything they knew. Liam didn't mention the photos, and Sarah didn't talk about how she found a receipt in Matt's jacket pocket from a cafe he wasn't supposed to be at. But both felt that their spouses were slipping away, and this united them stronger than any words. It all started with a phone call. Liam was sitting in the shed, disassembling an old engine, when his phone vibrated on the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag and picked up the phone, seeing the name Sarah on the screen. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but decisive. "Liam, it's me," she said. "Are you busy?" "No," he answered, leaning against the table. "Did something happen?" She was silent for a second, as if collecting her thoughts. "I was just thinking about what we talked about at school," she began. "About Matt, about Emily. I can't just sit and guess anymore. And you?" Liam felt his fingers tighten on the phone. He knew she was right. His own play with Emily, his coldness and observations had brought her over the edge, but he still didn't have the full picture. The photographs were evidence, but not proof, and her lies became increasingly obvious. He needed something specific and realized that Sarah could be the key. "Me too," he said finally. "Have you come up with something?" "Yes," she answered. "Let's meet. Not by phone. Somewhere quiet." At the bench, he suggested. "In 1 hour?" "Okay," she agreed. "See you." Liam hung up and returned to the engine, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He felt that this conversation with Sarah could change everything, either confirm his worst fears or give him a chance to find a way out. He didn't know what he wanted more, to expose Emily or to save their marriage. But one thing was clear: he was tired of uncertainty. An hour later, he was standing at Jim's shop, leaning against the car. The snow fell in soft flakes, settling on his jacket, and he watched Sarah walking down the street towards him. She was wearing a dark coat and scarf. Her face was pale, but determination was burning in her eyes. She stopped next to him, nodding to him. "Hello," she said, exhaling a cloud of steam. "Thank you for coming." "Hello," he replied. "What's on your mind?" Sarah looked around, as if checking for extra ears, and spoke more quietly. "I can't wait any longer, Liam," she said. "Matt, he's hardly ever home. He says it's school and projects, but I see that he's lying. Yesterday he came back late, and he smelled of more than just cigarettes. It was her scent, feminine, floral." Liam froze, feeling his heart clench. He knew that smell: vanilla and flowers, Emily's perfume. But he didn't talk about it, not now. "I also have doubts," he said instead. "Emily is late, lying about the teacher's lounge. I saw her with him, not close, but enough to understand that this was not just a job." Sarah nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew, but I didn't want to believe it." "What should we do?" Liam looked at her, and a plan began to form in his head, not impulsive, but calculated, like his game with Emily. He wanted the truth. He wanted to see them together, face to face, so that there was no longer any room for doubt. "Let's have dinner," he finally said. "For 4. We are with you, Emily and Matt. Let's invite them home as if it's just a friendly meeting. Let's see how they behave." Sarah looked up, slightly surprised. "Dinner?" she asked again. "Do you think this will work?" "If they're hiding something, they can't pretend forever," he replied. "We will watch. Every word, every look. If we're right, it will come up." She thought, fiddling with the edge of her scarf. Her eyes were full of anxiety, but a spark of determination flashed in them. "Okay," she said. "I agree." "When?" "Tomorrow evening," he suggested. "At our house. I'll tell Emily I want to get to know your family better. You'll convince Matt." "He will agree," she nodded. "He loves things like that to show how sociable he is. But I don't know if I can look at them if—" "You can," he interrupted, his voice firm. "We both can. We need to know." Sarah looked at him, and at that moment their alliance became something more than just shared suspicions. It was an agreement between two people standing on the edge, ready to either fall or find support. They exchanged numbers again in case something went wrong and went home, knowing that tomorrow evening would change everything. Liam got home before Emily. He went into the kitchen, put on the kettle, and began to think about how to present the idea of dinner without her suspecting anything strange. When Emily came in, brushing snow off her boots, he was already sitting at the table with a mug in his hands. "Hi," she said. Her voice was tired, but she tried to smile. "You're early." "Yes," he nodded, looking at her coldly but calmly. "I decided to rest. How is your day?" "Okay," she answered, taking off her coat. "Lessons, as always. And you?" "Likewise," he said, taking a sip of tea. "Listen, I was thinking. Maybe we can have dinner tomorrow. Let's invite Sarah and Matt. Let's get to know each other better, since we all live here." Emily froze, her hand frozen on the hanger. She turned around and her eyes widened for a second, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Dinner?" she asked again. "With Sarah and Matt?" "Yeah," he nodded, without looking away. "You work with him, and I got into a conversation with Sarah at school. Good people. Why not get together?" She nodded, but her smile was forced. "Yes, of course," she said. "Good idea. I... I'll tell Matt tomorrow." "Great," he replied, returning to his mug. "I'll start cooking." Emily walked into the living room, feeling her heart pounding. She didn't understand what Liam was up to, but his coldness, his sudden offer to get together with Matt and Sarah, unsettled her. She began to suspect that he knew more than he was saying, but she could not ask. That would mean risking revealing herself. The next day, Sarah called Liam in the morning, confirming that Matt had agreed. Her voice trembled, but she tried to hold on. "He said it would be fun," she said. "But I saw how tense he was when I mentioned Emily." "He's hiding something, Liam." "I know," he replied. "See you in the evening." "Hold on." The day passed in preparation. Liam bought groceries, meat, vegetables, a bottle of wine, and methodically prepared dinner as if it were a normal meeting. Emily helped, but her movements were nervous, and her conversations with Liam were short and strained. She tried to understand what he was up to, but his calmness only increased her anxiety. By 7 in the evening, everything was ready. The table in the living room was set: fried meat and potatoes, salad, wine in glasses. Liam put on a clean shirt, but his face remained expressionless. Emily, on the contrary, looked worried. She took too long to choose a dress, checked her phone too often. When the doorbell rang, Liam opened it, greeting Sarah and Matt with a cold but polite smile. "It's good to see you," he said, shaking Matt's hand. "Come on in." Sarah entered first, her gaze intense, but she smiled at Emily, trying to seem friendly. Matt followed her, his confident smile hiding a slight wariness. They sat down at the table and dinner began. Liam and Sarah watched. Every glance between Emily and Matt, every random word, every gesture, everything was recorded in their minds. Emily tried to act natural, but her hand shook as she poured the wine. Matt joked as usual, but his laugh was a little louder than necessary. Liam was cool and collected, asking questions about school with such precision that Emily and Matt began to fidget. Sarah, on the contrary, was silent, but her eyes were sharp as knives. "You and Emily worked well together on the project, right?" Liam asked, looking at Matt. "Yeah," Matt nodded, taking a sip of his wine. "She's great. Her ideas are great." "That's good," Liam said, his voice level. "Do you, Sarah, go to school often?" "Sometimes," she answered, glancing at her husband. "But Matt, is there more often?" "Really, dear?" Matt cleared his throat, smiling. "Well, work is work," he said. "And Emily, how is Liam coping with the move?" Emily hesitated, looking at her husband. "Fine," she replied. "He spends a lot of time in the workshop." The dinner continued, and the tension grew. Liam and Sarah saw everything: how Emily avoided looking at Matt for too long, how he accidentally touched her hand while passing the salt, and how they both immediately looked away. It wasn't clear evidence, but it was enough for Liam and Sarah. Their suspicions were confirmed every moment, and their alliance grew stronger. For Liam, this night was a turning point. He lay awake, lying in the dark next to Emily, who was breathing evenly. Pretending to be asleep, he could feel it in her tense body, in the way she avoided him even in her sleep. His game, cold, calibrated, calculated to throw her off balance, achieved its goal, but instead of triumph, he felt only emptiness. He saw her guilt, her fear, her attempts to hide what he already knew, but it did not bring him relief. Dinner showed him the truth in all its ugliness. Emily and Matt were connected not just by friendship or casual flirtation, it was a betrayal, deep and irreversible. When the first rays of light broke through the curtains, Liam stood up. He moved quietly, almost mechanically, collecting his things. His old suitcase, the same one with which they moved here from Vancouver, lay in the closet, covered with a thin layer of dust. He pulled it out, opened it, and began folding his clothes, jeans, shirts, the sweater Emily had given him last New Year. Each item fell into the suitcase with a thud, and each sound was like a goodbye. He didn't take anything extra, only what could fit in one bag. The house they had built together now seemed foreign to him, and he did not want to leave more here than necessary. Emily was still asleep, or pretending to be, when he finished. He walked into the kitchen and took a piece of paper from the notepad on the table, and the pen she used to write shopping lists with. His hand froze over the paper, words swirling in his head, but he didn't know how to express everything he felt. Anger, pain, fatigue, all of this mixed into a lump that he could not untangle. Finally, he wrote briefly, almost laconically, "I knew, for a long time. Take care of yourself." He reread the note, and its simplicity seemed right to him. It was not an accusation, it was not a cry, it was a farewell, cold and final, like his behavior in recent weeks. He placed the paper on the table, next to her favorite mug, and returned to the bedroom to get his suitcase. Emily was still lying motionless, and he did not wake her. He simply took the car keys, put on his jacket, and left the house, closing the door with a quiet click. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked to the car. The cold air burned his lungs, but he inhaled it deeply, as if clearing himself of what he had left behind. He threw the suitcase into the back seat, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. The old SUV honked its horn and Liam pulled out onto the road without looking back. He didn't know where he was going, to Tom's workshop, to a motel outside the city, maybe back to Vancouver, but it didn't matter. He drove away, leaving Emily to deal with what she had done, and for the first time in months he felt free, albeit with a bitter taste. Emily woke up to the sound of a car driving away. She lay with her eyes closed until she realized that the silence in the house had become too deep. There was no familiar clinking of dishes, Liam's footsteps, his soft whistling as he made coffee. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and she suddenly realized that something was wrong. She ran into the living room in her pajamas, barefoot, and froze when she saw the emptiness. His jacket was gone from the hook, his shoes from the doormat. Her gaze fell on the table where the note lay. She walked up, took the sheet with trembling hands and read, "I knew, for a long time. Take care of yourself." 3 short sentences written in his neat handwriting hit her like a hammer. She read them over and over again, and each time the words sank deeper. He knew. I knew it for a long time. It was not a question, it was not a request to explain, it was a fact, cold and undeniable. Her legs gave way, and she sank into a chair, clutching the note in her hands. The tears did not come immediately. At first there was emptiness, stunning and heavy, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. She looked at the mug, at the empty tabletop, at their house, which was now only hers, and realized that Liam was gone. He didn't just leave, he abandoned her, leaving her with the truth that she tried to hide. Her guilt, her lies, her meetings with Matt, all of this fell on her at once, and she finally began to cry, quietly, silently, hiding her face in her hands. She didn't know how long she sat there, maybe an hour, maybe more. The snow outside the window was falling non-stop, and the house seemed to her like a cage full of memories. She remembered his coldness, his views, his game, which she did not fully understand, and now everything fell into place. He knew from the very beginning, or almost from the very beginning, and waited until she herself reached the edge. And now he left, leaving her alone with this region, and she did not know how to live with it. Meanwhile, Sarah made her decision. Dinner was the last point for her. She saw how Matt laughed with Emily, how his hand accidentally or not accidentally touched hers, how he avoided her gaze when she asked questions. Returning home, she did not sleep, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, which had long gone cold. Her boys were asleep upstairs, and she thought about them, about how their family, no matter how imperfect, was falling apart because of his lies. In the morning, when Matt left for school, she called the lawyer. It was an old acquaintance from a neighboring town, with whom she studied at the university. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. "I need a divorce, Paul," she said. "I want to submit documents as soon as possible." "Are you sure, Sarah?" he asked, his tone soft but professional. "This is a serious step." "I'm sure," she replied, clutching the phone. "He's cheating on me. I know this, and I don't want to live with this anymore." Paul promised to have the paperwork ready by next week, and Sarah hung up, feeling her resolve strengthen. She didn't tell Matt anything yet. She wanted him to receive the documents officially so that he could see that this was not a threat, but a reality. Her pain, her anger, her fatigue from his excuses poured into this decision, and she knew there was no turning back. When Matt returned home in the evening, she greeted him coldly. He noticed her gaze, her silence, but tried to laugh it off. "Did something happen?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "You're like ice." "Nothing happened," she answered, her voice even but sharp. "I'm just tired." He shrugged and walked into the living room, unaware that she had already taken the first step towards their end. Sarah looked after him, knowing that he would soon find out, and her heart sank with pain for the children, but not for him. Emily didn't go to school that day. She called Mrs. Hart, citing a cold, and stayed at home, trying to comprehend Liam's departure. She walked from room to room, touching his things that he had left: tools in the shed, an old sweater in the closet, and each item was like a knife in her chest. She didn't know where he was, didn't know if he would ever return, and this uncertainty was killing her. By noon, she decided to call Matt. Her fingers trembled as she dialed his number, and his voice was tired when he answered. "Emily?" he said. "Where are you? You weren't here today." "Liam left," she blurted out, unable to contain herself. "Left a note. He knew Matt. I knew it all along." Matt fell silent, and she heard him sigh heavily. "Damn," he said finally. "Are you serious?" "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling. "He packed his things and left. I don't know what to do." "What are you going to do here?" he said, and there was a sharpness in his tone that she didn't expect. "If he knew, then that's the end, Emily. Everything was going to hell for us anyway." She froze, feeling his words hit her. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. "I mean, it doesn't work anymore," he said. "Sarah also suspects something. I see it in her. We both knew it wouldn't last forever. Maybe it's even better this way." "Better?" she asked, her voice rising. "Liam's gone, Matt. My life has fallen apart, and you say better? What do you want from me?" he snapped. "So that I drop everything and come running to you. I have a family, Emily. Children. I can't just leave like him." Her tears that she had been holding back finally broke out. I thought we meant something to each other," she said, her voice filled with pain. "It does," he said, softening his tone. "But that doesn't mean we can give up everything. We've gone too far, and now we're paying for it." Emily hung up before he could finish. She threw the phone on the sofa and curled up into a ball, sobbing like she had never sobbed before. Matt, who had once been her salvation, her spark, was now turning away, leaving her alone in the wreckage. Their romance, already fading, finally collapsed under the weight of reality. She realized that he would not leave for her, would not fight. He chose his family, his life, and she was left with nothing. A few days later, Sarah filed for divorce. Matt received them this morning while he was having breakfast with the boys, and his face went pale as he opened the envelope. He tried to talk to her, but she was adamant. "I know, Matt," she said, standing at the stove with cold calm. "I've known for a long time, and I don't want to endure this anymore." "Sarah, listen," he began, but she cut him off. "No," she said. Listen, we have children, and I won't let you ruin their lives any more than you already have. Leave." He left that same day, taking only a bag of things. Sarah stayed with the boys, explaining to them that Dad would live separately, and her voice trembled, but she held on. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt relief, heavy, bitter, but real. Emily found out about the divorce from Mrs. Hart, who called her to check on her. The news hit her, but did not surprise her. She already knew that her romance with Matt was doomed. She hadn't seen him since their last conversation, and he hadn't looked for her. Their connection ended, leaving behind only emptiness and regret. Liam, meanwhile, was staying at a motel an hour outside of town. He didn't call Emily, didn't check on her. He just lived, day after day, working in a local workshop and trying to figure out what to do next. He didn't feel victory, only fatigue. His departure was not revenge, but liberation, but it did not bring him peace. Emily was left alone in the house. She didn't know where Liam was, didn't know if he'd come back, but his note lay on the table as a reminder of what she'd lost. Her romance with Matt had collapsed, her marriage had fallen apart, and she stood in the midst of chaos, wondering how to put herself back together. Sarah had begun a new chapter by filing for divorce, but Emily was still in the past, clinging to the wreckage of what had once been her life. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.